Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and today I have a video for you that I frequently get asked about, and that is book recommendations, especially for Norse paganism and Norse mythology in general. So this is the video you've all been waiting for. I have compiled some of the books that I personally really like and that I would personally recommend. This is of course not an exclusive list. I have not read all the books in the world, so it's very possible that I will make even more videos on more book recommendations when I read more and more books and I find more that I like. So, let us start out. I will start out boring, because this is just like things that you have to have, basically. It's the classics, like the prose and poetic Eddas, for example, all of the sagas. I have two of them as books. I don't have all of the Eddas and sagas as books because you can find free translations online, so there's no need for buying them as books. Just if you want them, get them, but you don't have to. Additionally to the Eddas and sagas, which of course are a classic, like that is the closest sources, like the closest to primary sources that we will get. Apart from that, there are books like Saxo Grammaticus History of the Danes, or for example, maybe Tacitus Germania, which of course is more about the Germanic tribes, more in the south, like central Germany, but there are lots of overlaps and similarities between more Nordic tribes and Germanic tribes, so maybe you could read something like that. But definitely History of the Danes is great. So yeah, these are pretty boring. You probably know these already because they are classics that everyone should know. So let's get into more interesting things. One of the books I always recommend to complete beginners who have never read anything about Norse mythology, not even the Eddas, and that is actually Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. It is a retelling of the Norse myths, and no, it is not 100% accurate, and there's not all of the stories that exist are in this book. But I personally really like this because it's so easy to read. If you know Neil Gaiman's writing style, it's just easy. It's easy to read, it is fun to read, and if you're a complete beginner and you have never read texts that aren't as old as the Eddas and sagas, this will probably just be easier for a beginner. So maybe if you don't want to hop right into the Eddas, which can be quite difficult to read, then maybe read this first. I definitely really enjoyed this. We read that with my Witchcraft Coven, and everyone really enjoyed it. So this one, just be aware that it's not 100% accurate. Neil Gaiman sometimes fills in some gaps with his own imagination, but as soon as you read the originals, then it will be fine, you will know about that. Next up, I have some more academic texts for you. Of course, these are not necessarily specifically about Norse mythology or how you can practice Norse paganism today. It's also historical things, historical texts, but I personally think it's extremely important to also know about the cultural context and the history of the religion that you want to practice. So that is why I think it's extremely important to also read more academic texts like archaeological texts or maybe anthropological texts, historical ones. So let's dive into those. The first one is dirty. The first one is a total classic, and it is The Viking Way by Neil Price. This is a huge one. This is big, and it will take you long to read it. But if you're interested in basically pre-Christian Scandinavian magic and Seidr, for example, which I also always get questions about, then this is perfect. This is so awesome. I mean, in general, if you see books by Neil Price, get them. He's an expert about the Viking Age. So all of the books by him will be awesome. I read this, I think, 1.5 years ago, nearly 2 years ago, I think. I don't remember, but I read it and I didn't take notes, and I hate myself for it because, to be quite honest, I don't want to read it a second time because it's quite tedious to get through because it is an academic text. So it's not that fun to read, but there is so much important knowledge in there. So if you're interested in the magical aspects, then get this. Next up, we will stay with more magical things. It's 9 Worlds of Say the Magic by Jenny Blaine. This is a more, I think it's an anthropological study of Seidr. So while this is more archaeological because Neil Price is an archaeologist, this is more anthropological, and it also looks at how some people are reconstructing Seidr today, which I think some people don't really like, but it can be interesting. This is also not as much of a heavy read as this big boy, because this is only a little booky with, how many pages? 160 pages. So you will get through this quite quickly. Next up, getting a little bit older, because this is Gods and Myths of Northern Europe by H.R. Ellis Davidson. This just looks at mythology and goes into the gods, for example. If you want to know a little bit more about the gods, then this is a great book. It's also a fairly quick and easy read, even though it's a little bit older. I don't know where. It's from 1964, so it is a little bit older, but it's great. I loved it. It's an easy, quick read. Nice one. Next up, again, Neil Price. It's The Children of Ash and Elm, A History of the Vikings. So if you're interested in the Viking Age, which of course is a lot of the cultural context and background of Norse paganism. So I feel like this book is a must-read, honestly. It is very new, and I read through it so quickly because it's amazing. It just goes through basically all around the Viking Age, everything. And it's so easy to read, like even though it is by Neil Price, it is not, I wouldn't necessarily call it a scholarly or academic text. You can read through it very quickly and easily, and it's very enjoyable to read. So, very important historical context and historical background. Next up. This is getting a little bit more specific. This is actually by the same author as this one, but she got married somewhere between the books. So this is The Road to Hell, a study of the conception of the dead in Old Norse literature by Hilda Roderick Ellis. So it's the same author as Gods and Myths of Northern Europe. In general, her books are great. This is very much of an academic text. You also see that this wasn't meant to be a book. This was printed at some point, but it wasn't meant to be a book. And you also see, because I marked a lot of pages, that there is so much important stuff in there. I marked in this book, and you can see how much marker is in the book. So this is packed with info on everything surrounding basically burial rites and conception of spirits of the dead, draugur, things like that. This is fantastic and very, very interesting. This is very specific though, so if you're not into anything death related, then maybe you don't need to read it. Like, it's not a must read, but it's fantastic. Okay, next up we get into more easy reads, and this is 2 books on just, I would call it Norse Paganism intro books. So books about how you can practice Norse Paganism today. The first of them is Diana L. Paxton's Essential Asatru. I personally think this is good. This is a very quick read because it's also only roughly 200 pages. And this goes into very basic things like basic history, gods and goddesses, of course, a little bit of Germanic magic even, and very, very important, how to actually practice. So how you would, for example, perform a blot and things like that. I think there's also Norse pagan festivities in here. Yeah, heathen holy days. I just found it in the books. So those are always questions that I get, like how do I perform a blot, or which kind of festivities can I celebrate? So those are in this book, and I liked it. It's not like my favorite book, but it's a good book. One that I like even more as an intro is Ryan Smith's The Way of Fire and Ice. I always recommend it again and again, because this is not only a Norse paganism intro, this is an intro on inclusive Norse paganism. So it's specifically meant to be inclusive to people of different backgrounds, different sexes, different genders, different ethnicities. So this is why I love this book, because it's so inclusive. It's meant to be inclusive, and it also goes into a little bit of the problems that we have in the Norse pagan community with bigots and white supremacists and neo-Nazis and stuff, which a lot of books not really go into, which I find sad because I think it's very important, and this book goes into that. And even things like finding a community and things that you should look out for when finding a community, so that you don't get into a racist group, for example. These two, personally, I would recommend as intro books if you're new to Norse paganism and you don't really know how to actually practice. Like, if you know the history and stuff, that's good and well, but if you don't know how to apply it nowadays, then these books. Next up, I have actually a dictionary, because there is a dictionary of Norse mythology. This is awesome, because whenever I want to know something about a god or a goddess, for example, I will just look into this dictionary and it will basically tell me everything I need to know. It is very extensive. There are so many words in here that I have literally never heard of. So this is an extensive dictionary. This is amazing. So yeah, if you have this, you usually don't really need to look for a lot of sources on stuff, because this dictionary will just tell you. It's amazing. I love it, and it's thick. It's so thick. Okay, lastly, the last two books that I have right here are on runes. Let me tell you, it's hard to find books on runes that aren't people's UPG bullshit or books by bigots and fascists. I would say definitely don't get books by Eadred Thorsson. I have a lot of books by him, sadly, because I didn't know for a very long time like what kind of bullshit he writes and what kind of associations he has with the AFA and with the Amanen-Orden, and yeah. So don't invest in his books. It's not worth it. If you want to invest in books, one of the ones that I really like is Diana L. Paxton's Taking Up the Runes. This I really like because it includes the rune poems, which a lot of rune books don't even include the rune poems, which is strange, because this is literally where the interpretation should come from. So how do you not include them? So even if you don't like the interpretation in the book, you still have the rune poems to go off of. And also, she refers to various different authors, for example, Eadred Thorsson, but the thing is, she refers to different authors and their interpretations, so you can kind of decide which one makes sense for you and which doesn't. And she doesn't just tell you, oh yeah, this is what the rune means, and this is actually her interpretation, because in the end, it's all just our personal interpretation of the rune poems. So being able to kind of compare between different interpretations and then deciding what makes more sense to you, I think that's pretty convenient, so that's why I like this book. But actually, a very, very recent find, and one of my favorite books now, is Call of the Runes by Walter McGrory. It's this one. I think it's self-published. The author actually sent this book to me, but I did not get any money or anything. We just agreed that I would read this book, and if I like it, then maybe I will include it in a video. And I love this book. This book is awesome. This is First of all, it includes all the rune poems, which is amazing. It also includes various things like various runic finds, like actual archaeological findings and how they would be interpreted. It includes a lot of different types of rune readings that you can do, and it includes various different kinds of runic magic, which I also love because there were some things in there that I actually didn't really have on my mind, I didn't really think of yet. What I also extremely love, because it's usually not included in rune books, is that the cultural background of the runes included. For every single rune you have like a cultural background and why this rune would have been, or the association of the rune would have been important for people in pre-Christian Scandinavia. So yeah, honestly, this is great. This is amazing. This is actually right now my go-to whenever I forgot a meaning or something like that. I find myself going back to this book all the time, and I learned a lot. And I have read a lot of rune books, but this one was probably the best one that I've ever read, simply because it was kind of honest. A lot of rune books are like, this is the rune and I will tell you that this is the interpretation. Although it is the interpretation of the author, it's their UPG, it's their interpretation, but nobody says like, this is my interpretation. But this book is just really honest because it really explains where the interpretation is coming from. And it really goes in depth into the rune poems, so every single line in the rune poems is interpreted, so you know exactly where the interpretation comes from. It's not just an author just vomiting their interpretation, their UPG in your face. It's like, this is the interpretation and this is why, which is great. And I wonder why so little authors do that. So yeah, get this book. This book is great. And yes, those are all the books for my first book recommendation or source recommendation video. If you have other recommendations, put them in the comments because I really like learning and I really like reading. And there are, of course, books that I haven't read yet. So if you have other recommendations, put them in the comments. And I bet I will make more videos like this. The more books I read, the more great books I will find. And I will always tell them which ones I like. Before I close off the video though, patron shout out. Thank you so much to Virginie, Joseph, Offendra, Elinora, Noel, David, Christine, Rixie Business, Julius, Valo, Mackenzie, Annalena, Madison, Bast, Yukai, Kirby, Liz, Lisa, Ashley, Erica, Sturfried Stars, Christopher Ways, Glacier, Fabienne, Anna, Laura, Kristen, John, Ivy, Phoenix, Anton, Jenny, Tyler, Els, Maggie, Betty, Misty, Tiffany, Amy, Colette, Tell, Timothy, Coffee, the Honorary Gossip Squirrel, Bjorn, and Ash. Thank you so much. As always, I really hope you enjoyed this video and you got some good recommendations. If you did like the video, of course, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up and ring the bell if you want to be notified of all of my new videos. You can also, of course, check out my other socials and my shop where I sell ethically and sustainably sourced witchcraft and paganism tools. Of course, you can also check out my Patreon if you want to, and I will see you in the next video, I guess. Bye!